Hello, everyone. My name is Sera Young, and I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about the Household Water Insecurity Experiences Scale, which is a new way to quantify water access and use. But I wanted to start by appreciating David and Stefan and Val and everyone else for making this presentation still possible despite this new normal in which we're living. So I'm going to keep my presentation brief and answer 3 questions in the course of it. And the first is, what is age-wise? And the second is, what has the age-wise scale told us to date? And lastly, what can age-wise tell us going forward? I'm presenting today on behalf of a huge consortium of scholars from many disciplines who've been working together over the past couple of years to develop a new way of thinking about and actually measuring water experiences, especially access and use. I could talk at length about the development, but I'm going to say just briefly that what we did was we drew on experiences that and existing scales, site-specific scales for particular places in the world. Like there's a great one for Ethiopia. There's a pretty good one for Kenya. There's a great one for the Texas-Mexico border. We took items from those scales and wrapped around them our sort of best understanding of what might be globally valid. And we implemented those in 28 sites around the world. And these sites were selected not to be representative, but to stress test the candidate items. So we selected places with maximal heterogeneity in terms of climate and water infrastructure, types of problems with water, so that we would have the most robust scale. Now, we describe at length in these papers how we went about developing this scale, and this QR code will take you to all of them, but all of them are available open access. And please feel free to email me if there's any questions I can answer about the development. But cutting to the chase, the final 12 items query about experiences with water in the last 4 weeks. So we ask how often in the last 4 weeks has a household or an individual, depending on the manifestation of the purpose of the survey, how often has someone experienced worry about problems with water, or interruptions with their supply, or has been unable to wash their clothes because of problems with water, or have their plans changed because of problems with water? So we take those 12 items and I'll explain on the next slide, and we score them. So these 12 items, let's take this hypothetical woman who was in our study in Kenya. So the questions take about 2 to 3 minutes to ask these 12 items, and responses can be never, rarely, sometimes, or often, and those are weighted such that often is a 3 and never is a 0. And the range of the responses is therefore 0 to 36. So you simply add the frequencies that a person experienced them, or a household depending, and you can get a score. You can also calculate the prevalence of water insecurity. Now, we explain in some of those papers that you saw a few slides back how we arrived at a 12 for a cutoff. But with all of the reasons that we did, we have provisionally said that a household water insecurity score of or above 12 would be a water insecure household. And so based on some of the sites that we had in our age-wise study, you can see that the prevalence ranged quite a lot across sites. And prevalence is important. I mean, individuals or household scores are important for certain analyses, and community or even national proportions are useful for other purposes, as we'll see later. So that is what age-wise is, and we're still early on, but it's told us a number of things to date. So way back when I wasn't even thinking about water insecurity in 2014 and 2015, I was doing a study on household food insecurity and how that shaped women's health and that of their children. but people were talking to me so much about how problems with water were shaping their well-being. And this is a qualitative study here on the left, led by my student, Shalene Collins, where we did a number of ethnographic techniques to understand how water was shaping these women's lives. And this was perhaps the most surprising example of an unexpected way that water was important. And this is a woman who had a photo taken of herself. It was called photo elicitation interviews. And she described how he will beat me up because of water, talking about her husband. He will beat you up if he doesn't get water in the bathroom, or if you didn't wash clothes because there was no water. And I fear beatings. And if water is what will lead to beatings, I'll always make sure my husband at least gets water, even if it means doing away with other things that may need water for the day. Also based on that qualitative work, we sort of hypothesized that there were 4 main pathways by which water insecurity, WI, would impact health and well-being. And those were borne out in the Kenyan data. So this was psychosocial health, increased worry and shame and conflict and violence. These were also borne out in physical health, so this violence that you saw on the last slide, but less hygiene and sanitation, pregnancy-related complications. Women talked about, a number of things. Attack by animals or other individuals, and of course, waterborne disease. The nutrition consequences were affected both food consumption, the quality and the quantity, food insecurity, increased energy expenditure with hauling water, and a number of changes in breastfeeding practices. And then economic productivity was the 4th pathway, and that included increased water expenditure, increased opportunity costs. So you can go to work, or you can fetch water, you can go to school, or wait in a queue, and these other economic influences. So we're early days, but I can show you how the measurement of household water insecurity is showing us that water insecurity is this underappreciated driver of a number of health outcomes, health and well-being. So in a paper under review at Social Science and Medicine, we show what's called a syndemic relationship, which is where multiple factors, in this case, water insecurity, food insecurity, HIV, are mutually exacerbating each other to worsen depressive symptomatology among women with children, 2-year-olds. Relating to physical health, we measured injury, in the risks of physical injury during water acquisition. And so these are data you can see down here from across all of the HWISE sites, or most of the HWISE sites, I think 25 of them. And my postdoc, Vidya Venkataramanan, has done a great job of not only showing all of the different types of injuries that are related to water fetching, fractures and burns and lacerations, of physical pain, fatigue, contusions, but also in this paper that we're about to submit, you'll see that the household water insecurity is probably one of the strongest predictors, if not the strongest predictor, of physical injury. And this injury associated with water hauling is something that's not considered because we don't quantify it, we don't measure it it hasn't been regarded in the same way that diarrhea, for example, has been associated with problems with water. So I think this is what these data are showing us, is this really underappreciation for the consequences of water insecurity when it comes to fetching. Also related to physical health, we partnered with Oxfam, who did a couple of evaluations of their projects in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Zambia. And there's a lot on this slide, but focus here. So household water insecurity predicted a greater likelihood of drinking unsafe water in the prior month, which is interesting. But I think equally interesting is that governance, so good governance, was associated with less household water insecurity, or worse governance is associated with more household water insecurity. And this bore out in both places. And there was a similar relationship between diarrhea in the prior month, and also in Zambia only, we showed resilience to cholera was associated with less water insecurity. So it's a double negative. So more household water security was associated with greater resilience to cholera. And in this time of highly contagious infectious diseases, this is highly relevant. Moving to the nutrition pathway, we see that water insecurity is strongly associated with food insecurity. This was published in American Journal of Human Biology, and again, this is across household water insecurity sites, the Age-wise study. We see a positive association across all sites. But what's even more interesting, and this is moving back to Kenya data, is that household water insecurity actually predicts household food insecurity. So these are panel data where we see household water insecurity predicts household water insecurity subsequently. This is at 15 months postpartum, 18 months postpartum, and 21 months postpartum. My cat is here to help us with a little personal touch on this presentation. But then what I really want to draw your attention to is that water insecurity here predicts subsequent food insecurity. And given that food insecurity is a development outcome for many agencies, many organizations, this is a really striking finding. We also looked at how water insecurity impacted infant feeding, and this is recently published by a former PhD student of mine, Roseanne Schuster, where she looked through open-ended responses to how problems with water have impacted infant feeding across the HY sites. And we found that it increased with the likelihood of children being given non-breast milk foods. It impacted how caregivers could take care of children. And it also limited the breastfeeding practices, which had consequences for infant health, including dehydration, hunger, undernutrition, and mortality. The fourth pathway, and this is the last slide about what HWISE has told us, is that water insecurity is associated with greater water expenditures. So what we found is that higher household water expenditures was associated with greater water insecurity, and that there was no kind of threshold above which households could overcome water insecurity. So you can't, when water problems are big enough, you can't kind of pay your way out of them. And there's much more to be explored with that. This is sort of our first peek into the relationship between household water insecurity and economic productivity. So what can AgeWise tell us going forward? If you do a Google search right now for household food insecurity, you'll find something like 16 or 17,000 references. If you do the same for household water insecurity, you'll find something like a few hundred. So my point is that this is really early days, and we've done what I would call, respectfully, the boring part of scale development. I mean, interesting, hard, but a little bit boring. What I find much more interesting is the actual implementation of the scale to find out how those pathways are being shaped, and in fact, if there are other pathways. So the HY scale is open access, anyone can use it, takes a very short time, and what this can do is this can guide the targeting of resources, can help us to understand the consequences, and it can also help us to evaluate the impact of the intervention. So when a well is built or when a pricing regimen is changed for water, do people's HY scores go up? So there are a number of agencies who are implementing this. You saw me mention Oxfam. These are some of the others. Uh, and there are many more, both researchers and organizations. Oops, funny animation. But what I'm most excited about is this partnership between UNESCO, Northwestern University, and Gallup World Polls. So Gallup does representative national sampling in 140 countries worldwide. And in November, we signed a contract to have them collect nationally representative data in all of Africa, as well as in India. And in India, there will be oversampling such that should have state level representative data. And this just is thrilling on many levels. And I have a lot of analytic ideas that I would love to hear what you have, what yours might be thinking. So to conclude, I just want to talk about what some of the next steps are. If there's a way to get feedback on your thoughts of what next steps are, I mean, David and Stefan and Feng Mao and I have been thinking through some potential ways of, well, let me work on the next steps first. So the next steps are a short form. I'm pretty delighted that we got the HY scale items from 32 down to 12. And it only takes 3 minutes, but people want less, and I don't really blame them. So we have developed a short form that has just 4 items and takes about just a minute to administer. We haven't published it yet, but the analyses are done. I'm happy to share that. I'm very excited for Gallup data analysis. So what I was saying is Feng and Stefan and David and I have looked at overlapping some data sets with the HY's data, which is interesting but a little tricky because those sites are not nationally representative. But we plan on overlapping nationally representative data sets, for example, JMPs or hydrological data, or, well, there's a number of possibilities with the Gallup data, and I'm open to other suggestions. I would also like to implement the HY scale on other sites. There's no reason to think that household water insecurity isn't a problem in South America or in high-income countries. And if any of you have studies in which it would be appropriate and possible to add the HY scale, I would be so delighted if you could consider that. We haven't yet validated the HY scale for high-income countries. It's not to say that it's not valid, but we do need to do both qualitative and quantitative work to make sure that it's as appropriate as it can be. I'd also like to work on supporting HY's literacy. I mean, a number, like we can talk about GDP in a way that makes sense to people, or life expectancy, and those are units that policymakers especially, use and can compare and can set targets by. I would like to maybe promote HY's literacy, both to understand our own water insecurity situations, but also to empower people to take action, to preserve the environment, and to garner the economic resources that are needed to make change. So with that, I will flash up my email again. Oh gosh, it's not even on there. It's my name, Sera.Young, Young, at northwestern.edu. You can also find me on these websites and on Twitter. And I look forward to hopefully a reunion in person to have more of a dialogue about household water insecurity and measurement for health and well-being. Thanks again.